Vince, yes, the ultimate boss. I would go at the time I was there, John. The production facility was in Owings Mills, Maryland. They didn't have the facility built in Connecticut. So
Oh,
usually
wow.
once a week, I would go down to Maryland and we would do our special reports, updates, wrestling spotlight with Lord Alfred Hayes was the name of that. That was the third show they ran. And that's where the tapings were. Other times I would fly to wherever the wrestlers were to do these interviews that were a big part of the show back then, personalized interviews, customized for whatever market they were going to. And that was always a crazy day. And but yeah, and then the TV tapings, obviously it would work under Vince. It'd be a Superstars of Wrestling one night, Wrestling Challenge the next night. Usually cities about 2 hours apart. It was a long night. They filmed probably for 4 or 5 hours by the time they get 3 1-hour shows out of there by the time that they did all the interviews and the stand-ups and 3 different languages, and French and Spanish. So it was always neat. And obviously Vince was on hand for all those.
Was Kevin Dunn there yet? I know he wasn't in charge,
Yes.
but was he still? Oh, he was. Okay. What was his job
Absolutely.
back then?
Kerwin Silfies was our director. Kevin Dunn was in the truck. I worked with him very closely.
What did you think about old KD?
Kevin Dunn?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was great. He was a young man like all of us then. Yeah, he was great. Yeah, and he's still there. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. He's one of the big bosses now. Yeah.
Yeah,
He's basically the number 2 guy. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it was great working with him. And yeah, he was in the truck with Kerwin Silfies, who was a very well-known director and very good. I met her. There was a guy named Ferd Manning who did the lighting. He was the same guy who would do the HBO lighting. And that was always neat coming in the ring, at 10 o'clock in the morning to the arena, popping over there for some production meetings and seeing Ferd Manning taking every light. And okay, that left, that right. And they would go around the whole thing. And they had this, it was a unique look in its day for wrestling. It wasn't the dark,
Dingy,
the dark one
smoky.
that the competitors had. It wasn't a small little gym or studio. It was a big, major sports building. And it was lit to perfection. The crowd was lit and with spotlights, and it had a look. And that was the guy who did it. So it was a neat business. And I will say that the entrance of Hulk Hogan into a ring with I'm a Real American playing is as bananas as it gets in any sports entertainment event ever. I mean, and this is back in the 80s where they didn't have as much going with lights and sound systems as they do now. Electrifying. And they would always hold them for non-televised when they did the card because they wanted the crowd to stay for the 3-hour production, the 3 different shows. And then he would be in what they call the dark match, mostly. He was not on the local Saturday afternoon show very often, other than an interview or a storyline. His match would be dark. I think the cameras were rolling, but they wouldn't do play-by-play on it. But the crowd would stay. It might start 7 and Hogan comes out 11:20 and they're going nuts because they wanted to see him. When I remember working with them on these interviews I mentioned earlier, there were 3 interviews in every show that were, I believe, 2 minutes and 24 seconds. And it probably covered the next 2 months out, 3 months out, whatever the storyline was for the shows. These are house shows. So if they were going to Springfield, Missouri in 6 weeks, they'd be cutting all these personalized interviews, or Springfield, Mass, or the Centrum in Worcester, or the Kiel Center in St. Louis, or whatever the place was. And I would go meet the guys on a house show, like in Phoenix, for example, fly out there. We'd be in a Holiday Inn in a room not much bigger than this one here. They put up that blue backdrop, lighting, camera, usually Rene Goulet, I think, was that his name? Yes.
Yeah.
The great French Canadian wrestler, I think he was. A great guy. He was our checker. He'd sit on the side. And I would do interviews with these guys, and usually about 20 in a row with each guy. Maybe do 100 interviews in a day. And they would put the card up on a piece of paper, and they would put that paper right under the camera, kind of right in the middle of the camera with a piece of tape. And it would say maybe like Madison Square Garden, May 5th, 1987, and it have the card listed. And I would go down, okay, Junkyard Dog will take on the Iron Sheik, and Nikolai Volkov and Boris Zukov will take on a team of the Saki, CV Rafi, and so on. And Hulk Hogan will be on the card. And then Hogan would come in, brother, and do his bit. Now, Hogan liked to start out with small markets. So we would do Erie, Pennsylvania, Paducah, Kentucky area, Topeka, Kansas. And after about 10, when he warmed up, he'd go, okay, brother, bring on New York. Because usually the card was the same. And so he warmed up with about 10 small markets. And then, we're coming to Madison Square Garden. It was really cool how we did it. But it was a lot of work because you'd have to do all those interviews. And then probably in the markets where you're not going to do a live show for 3 or 4 months, then they would run a generic interview.
Who ended up replacing you? Sean Mooney, I guess it was in the
Yes.
WWF?
Yeah, it was Sean Mooney.
Any sort of relationship with him or no?
I did his podcast not too long ago.
Oh, nice.
I don't recall if we overlapped for a month or a week or whatever. But yeah, I didn't really know him that well. But I did his podcast. I've gotten to know over the years, I gotten to know him a little bit. But at the time, I didn't really know him. I replaced Ken Resnick,
yes,
who was on before me, and then he replaced me. There's not a lot of longevity in these sideline guys if you were not Mean Gene Okerlund.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's like they get tired of you after 2 years.
Like they always want to switch. Even today, they use a lot of different people today, and they switched them. Yep.
Yeah, but I'm happy to say, though, when I watch those interviews and people send them to me, that they hold up. They stand the test of time.
It's amazing to me that everybody remembers you. Like you said, it was only 2 years in WWF and sometime in the UWF. It's crazy. Everybody remembers you. There'll be guys on TV nowadays for like 10 years, and you don't even remember who they are or what they did or can't remember their names. Why do you think that is? Is that just that was the best period in wrestling, and then everybody remembers it so fondly?
I think that's a lot of it. I think it's the people that I was able to work with. The interviews became sort of classics. All of them were great. They were well-defined characters, and they were almost pop culture characters. Like everybody knew those guys. Randy Savage was on commercials, and Hogan, and they were, and also it had a little more of a family feel to it, even though it was wrestling. Your 7-year-old would watch it, and your 80-year-old grandfather would watch it. Yep. And now it's become a little more adult in nature. Not as much. I know they went through that period in the 90s in really 2000s where it was, almost R-rated. But there was an attraction to it. I wish my kids were around then to be able to watch wrestling back in the day. I think it was better. It had a little more innocence to it. It was just getting going with kind of taking a new path of storylines and characters and these larger than life characters became dolls at Toys R Us that you would buy, just like Vince said to his father when he was younger that someday, not G.I. Joe, they're going to have wrestling dolls. And his father looked at him like he was crazy. And it became big, So I think that was a big part of it, the culture and the characters that these guys were. And I happened to be having a good seat. I was right next to him doing the interviews at the time. And then to have it relive, which you wouldn't expect then, and to be re-aired where these interviews pop up. I have this 80s wrestling or somebody sends me like stuff, and I can almost remember the line before I see it.